Hello, Exorcist. It's me,
Powered by
Jamie, here
Riverside
as
FM.
promised, as teased, to talk about the movie Longlegs through the lens of, well, I don't know which lens is which. It's neurodivergence through the lens of Longlegs or Longlegs through the lens of neurodivergence. Either way, we'll see. Well, I gotta say, y'all, this topic is so near and dear to my heart for so many reasons, which I think is going to become apparent as this podcast goes along. In fact, my neurodivergent ass is so nervous that I can't even record a video for this. So you're getting my voice only today. So if you're looking for a video, it's not there. And so without further ado, let's get into it. So I just want y'all to hang with me for just a few minutes because I am eventually going to go get into some movie details and I'm going to weave into some points from the movie. But I do think it's super important for me to, first of all, define what neurodivergence is. And I also think it's really important for me to outline my feelings around diagnosis for me to better relay to y'all as my audience, because this is my podcast, my feelings about all of this, in order for me to be able to relate how I relate to this topic, how I am able to better serve my clients with the knowledge that I have, and why I think Longlegs is an important movie and how this all weaves in. So first of all, I wish this was interactive because I would be so curious to know how many of y'all know what the word neurodivergent means. How many of you identify as neurodivergent in some way? This is one where I'm going to be super curious to get your feedback and comments on, to know kind of where you started at this podcast and where you ended. So you can either leave comments on the podcast or you can email me at exorcistwithin@gmail.com. Or, most of y'all are now following my social media pages. And if not, you can look up the Exorcist Within on Facebook or Instagram. Okay, I'm nervous. Quit wasting time, Jamie. Let's go. I definitely needed an outline for this one because it is such a big topic for me to tackle. So first of all, I'm just going to straight up give y'all some definitions. So neurodiversity is the range of natural diversity that exists in human neurodevelopment. So essentially, what that means is just the diversity of human thinking, the diversity of human minds. This is everybody in the world, right? Everybody in the world has a different brain. Every individual has a different brain. Everybody has fits into some sort of diversity. And so that's the highest level here, neurodiversity. And so then if we drill down to the next level of what is neurotypical, a neurotypical person is a person or people whose neurodevelopment falls within the range usually considered to constitute, quote, typical development. And so let's think about what typical means for just a second. Immediately when I see this, I'm like, typical. Okay, who defines what typical means? Who defines what normal means? Okay, first of all, I do want to say that there is science behind this, and I am not the best person in the world to try to explain neuroscience. I get completely tripped up on my words, so I'm not even going to try to do it. But I will say that neuroscience, because of the wonderful technology that we have today, because of functional MRIs, we are able to see human brains and see different parts of the brain that are more or less active and equate that to what is different amongst brains. And so there is objective evidence that we can point to about what is a neurotypical brain. But generally speaking, my argument is that typical or normal is a social construct. And what do I mean by a social construct? It's fake. Whoever is the majority population, that means whoever is basically has the most power and privilege in whatever society that we live in, is basically the people who are making the rules, who are saying what's normal and what's not normal. And that goes for not only neurotypical, but it also goes for literally any type of diversity. Skin color, race, that's why racism exists. Religion, that's why there's religious wars still going on today. And so naturally there is oppression when it comes to people who do not fit a neurotypical presentation. In other words, people who are not perceived as typical or normal to others. I just want to make this very clear. I believe that the entirety of human existence, of everything that we experience, is a spectrum. So don't even get me started on that. We're going to talk about spectrums probably in every podcast. And so neurotypical, so then the other side of that is neurodivergent. And so neurodivergent is a person or people whose neurodevelopment falls outside of or diverges from the range usually considered typical development, what's typically considered under the neurodivergent umbrella. You've got ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette's. And here's one that really opened my friggin' eyes during the first time I took a training on neurodivergence: trauma. And one of my most favorite books on the topic, y'all, I love the name of this book. It's called The Neuroqueer Heresies. Whew, you can get it on audio, you can get it on physical media. This is one of my most favorite books ever on the topic. Expansive thinkers. So literally expanding your brain through these practices of meditation, psychedelics, and whatnot. Yeah, quite a few things that I know until I started really diving into this, didn't really understand to be part of neurodivergence. So here's where I want to transition into my feelings about diagnosis, because I've already given you examples of what is typically considered under the neurodivergent umbrella. Clearly, I've already used diagnostic type of words like attention deficit hyperactive disorder and autism. So when I learned diagnosis in college, I was taught diagnosis through basically two different models. The medical model, which is essentially what we're doing when we diagnose people. We use the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So the medical model is sort of a pathologizing model where we give people a label. We sort of look at this list of symptoms that is a construct that, sure, yeah, a bunch of smart people got together and decided what made up a diagnosis. It's a construct, aka something that is constructed. And so on one hand, the medical model of diagnosis can be helpful for folks to, it can be helpful for people to be able to understand themselves better, to have a lens to see themselves through. On the other hand, it can be really pathologizing. And what I mean by pathologizing is it can make you feel broken. It can make you feel like something's wrong with you. And diagnosis can stick with you and hang with you your entire life. And so, but that is just one way of seeing human beings and thinking about issues and concerns that they deal with. The other model is what I think of, or what I was taught as to be the person-centered model, is to understand people in context of the society that they live in, within their families, within the jobs that they work, within their friend, with all things considered, and which means they don't need a diagnosis. They need help and care within that is very personal to them, essentially. And this is probably not going to. And so when I was in school, I learned both models and the pros and cons of each. As a person-centered therapist, it's probably not going to surprise y'all that I tend to not buy into the medical model of diagnosis. One of the big problems I have with the DSM, especially how it relates to neurodivergent diagnoses, especially something like autism, is it treats it like a disorder. And let me just pause right there and say, going back to spectrums, that something like autism, I just want to be extremely clear that I'm not an expert in this. I don't have lived experience of having children, of working with children. And so I just want to be very clear about that. All of my experience is from personal experience, working with clients now, a lot of research that I've done. And so here's what I've learned is that something like autism, it varies so widely in its presentation. The way that I was taught to talk about autism needs is high support needs, low support needs. So someone with high support needs, for example, with autism, needs a lot of support. They might need a lot of extra support with daily needs, with learning, with maybe every moment of their life. Someone with low support needs might have trouble with social interactions or with regulating external stimulus, but that's it. And so autism just varies so widely. I do not want to downplay symptoms that might present in autism or ADHD. But with that being said, the problem that I have with the DSM is it treats any type of neurodivergent diagnosis as a disability. And from what I've learned in my work is that yes, these neurodivergent conditions can be disabling. Absolutely. But let's go back to the top. Neurodivergence is a natural range of diversity that exists in human neurodevelopment. And we have created these constructs as a society that have said what is typical, what is divergent. And so, again, if it's just a natural form of diversity, then why are we pathologizing people that are different? Why are we telling some people that they're disabled while these other people are not? And again, I realize that this presents with higher support needs than others, and I don't want to take away from that. But here's what I want to say about higher support needs. In the Neuroqueer Heresies, absolutely love the title of that book, Nick Walker talks about disability, again, through the context of society. It's society that disables people. And so if you think about the comparison to someone who's in a wheelchair, right? The folks who are walking around with two legs, we have ability to walk upstairs, but someone in a wheelchair needs a wheelchair ramp, and they don't have access to a building without that. And so without those wheelchair ramps, it is society, it is infrastructure that has disabled that person. And if you make that same parallel to someone with, and I'm just going to go back to autism and ADHD, for example. If you take a child with autism and ADHD and you stick them in a classroom with students that are neurotypical and you expect them to learn the same way, it's not going to work. Or if you take someone with, ADHD or autism and you expect them to interact socially with neurotypical people, it's not going to work. They're going to be quickly identified as weird. If we understand neurodiversity as a range of human existence, that means that we have to, as a society, offer a range of human experience, the same as we offer accommodations for people who are disabled in other ways. Society has to stop disabling people and start enabling them. I have a wonderful teacher friend who is so passionate about creating IOPs for schools that helps really personalize care plans for kids so that they don't have to feel outcast or left behind in school, that they can get individualized and specialized care in schools. So I just want to come back to the top again and talk about diagnosis versus not diagnosis. So some people find it super valid to get diagnosed because it helps them understand themselves better. They have this aha moment. I've heard it called, there's a wonderful social media page, Torin Wolf and his mother, Serenity Wolf, that does an amazing job talking about their autistic and ADHD lived experiences. Highly recommend you go check them out. Serenity, she talks about having grief relief, being late diagnosed in life as autistic, but grieving over all the time that she lost because she could have, if she would have understood herself better, maybe she could have lived her life a little bit better, but also relieving to know, okay, this is I'm not weird. I'm not broken. Like I am just different for this reason. My brain is literally different. There's pros and cons to getting diagnosis. I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but in the state of Louisiana, it is hell expensive to get a formal autism diagnosis. And some people just don't have access to get an autism diagnosis. And if you can't get an autism diagnosis, I know as a kid, then you don't have access to those individual support needs that you might need in school to be able to help accommodate your different learning style or your different social needs, which is a huge, it's don't even get me started. I can't even imagine what that would be like. And I also just want to say, here's something else that I hear out there. I do hear a lot of folks out there self-diagnosing themselves with autism, ADHD, trauma, whatnot. We do live in a society where information is readily available and people are able to connect with each other, share about symptoms, and find community through connecting with other people who share these same traits. I don't know if I have an opinion on this, y'all. I'm just going to reflect back what I hear in the community. On one hand, again, it's helpful to connect with other people in community and not feel that you're alone and to learn more about yourself through others. On the other hand, I do hear that this overly self-diagnosing, this kind of pop psychology thing that happens does make people feel who really suffer greatly. And I'll use ADHD as the big one that I see. It's pretty common these days for people to run around and say, "Oh, my ADHD is acting up," or it's my ADHD," because they're having trouble focusing for a couple minutes on a task or something. And it makes people with disabling ADHD feel super invalidated. Here's the opinion that I do have. Here's my small little rant about this. We do live in a society where we're always on our phone, we're always on computers. The addictive dopamine cycle quality it has on your body and your nervous system. So it is no wonder that probably everybody in the world in an industrialized society has a little bit of attention deficit because we're so distracted by media and our phones because it's addictive. I remember when TikTok went out a couple months back and everybody was panicking, like someone like cold turkeyed them off of their drugs all of a sudden, because it is literally, I'm not kidding y'all, if y'all don't believe me, look up yourself. It is the same chemical effect on the brain as like any other addictive drug. So I do think that there is a difference in people who suffer from ADHD, and I do think we all suffer from some attention deficit because of just the nature of where society has gone. So I'll get off my soapbox now. All right, so there is your classroom lecture to learn a little bit about neurodiversity. So here is how I relate to this topic. I'm sure to some extent everybody, I am not alone in this. I know everybody at some point in their life has felt weird or outcasted or left out of something, and so I don't want to sit here and have a pity party or pretend like I'm unique in that way, or that alone makes me neurodivergent. But I gotta admit, y'all, this is a little bit hard to talk about, so I'm just taking a deep breath and just kind of settling into this topic now that it's getting personal, because a lot of this is actually really hard to admit, because I feel like people that know me personally, very personally, and that probably known me my whole life are probably going to be like, this is not the person that I know who is talking right now. So as far back as I can remember, I've had trouble making friends. And so when I look back on my life, I was a lonely kid. I really only had one friend like in elementary school. And I remember when she was not around, I would kind of hide like in a corner on the playground, or look for any excuse to not have to go on the playground. I would just play by myself on the weekends, and like I'm an only child, and I just remember being so alone. At school I was, because I felt like at school definitely I felt lonely and singled out, because if you're like the one kid standing around by yourself, I did feel like everybody was looking at me. At home, not so much. I didn't feel terribly lonely. I loved playing out in my backyard and climbing trees, and I had a playhouse that my dad built for me. So once I was moving into middle school, my best friend moved away, and I'm not gonna lie, I was part of the popular crowd, but I never felt like I belonged anywhere, because like I would hang out with the popular crowd, but I was also a nerd. I was also kind of edgy. Like I've always been a horror nerd. I've always liked rock music. And so I just never really felt like I had a place. but I think I tended to migrate towards the popular crowd because that's what I thought I was supposed to do, and also a lot of it had to do with my mom and kind of how she was, the direction she was trying to push me in life. I remember the first time people started calling me weird and a nerd, and I think it was sometime around like late elementary school, early middle school. I started wearing glasses, and I started becoming really active into like science clubs and stuff, and people started calling me weird and nerdy. And at some point, like, people kind of started catching on to sort of my odd mannerisms and calling me weird. Um, and then at some point, high school, I just started leaning into my quirkiness and dressed kind of punky and colored my hair colors and stuff. And what I see now was me unmasking. I'll talk more about masking later. And I just remembered, and I'm struggling to talk about it right now because I just remembered there was family members that would just not stop commenting on my hair and my clothes. And it hurt me so bad because I felt like when I was trying to express who I truly wanted to be, I got made fun of for it. And so I would always just revert back to being this, cheerleader, beauty queen persona that always felt fake on one hand, and then the trouble is, on the other hand, is I always have been like a really nice, highly empathetic, kind person. So that's always genuine. So I struggled a lot silently in school with feeling like fitting in the way I was supposed to and fitting in with how I really wanted to, because when I did things I wanted to, I felt ostracized for it. Some of my favorite times in high school was my senior year of high school, when me and kind of made a new little group of friends, and we used to go to the drive-in, and we would go to concerts and just kind of ride around town and stuff, and that was a fun time for me. I think I'm having a hard time talking about this because I feel like this is probably the first podcast where I'm talking about like people from back home and people in my family, and it's one of those things where there's definitely a part of me that's like, don't offend anybody. Don't make anybody feel bad. But this is my truth, and so I'm gonna talk about it. So yeah, having trouble socially has always been a problem for me. It really always has been, whether I was pretending it was or not, to be quite honest. Another thing that really presents for me as a neurodivergent quality is sensory burnout. One of the best definitions I've ever heard of autism is that the autistic brain is not capable of filtering out stimuli. So imagine a neurotypical brain as a coffee filter. It's able to filter out appropriate levels of external stimuli, feelings and sounds and smells and temperatures and whatever else. But an autistic brain, and again, autism is a spectrum, so everybody's different, but generally speaking, the autistic brain is more like a colander, right, where everything gets through and you kind of feel everything all at once. Once I heard that definition, this was a couple years ago in my training, it hit me like a sack of fucking something. And I was like, oh my God, I have always been like that, but I'm getting worse as I get older. Like, I'm pretty sensitive to sounds, and I'm very sensitive to smells, and I have a very hard time weeding out that stuff. I get headaches a lot because of it. And it's another reason why I don't do well socially. Like, I cannot handle being around a lot of people for a long period of time because I just can't handle all the sounds. And I do like the term empath because there is definitely a spiritual side of me where I do believe in auras and the cheese that are all kind of overlapping. That is really my psyche and my spirit is like all taking in at once. But also from like the neurodivergent standpoint, being in a lot of crowds or being around people all at once, like, I'm literally taking in all the sounds. I'm literally attuned to everybody's feelings and emotions all at once, and like, it's just too much to handle. So I that sensory burnout because of all the sensations coming at once is just too much for me. I also have extremely high executive functioning, which is something that I have noticed for folks is definitely a spectrum. So it's made me a great employee my entire life. So I am almost like a supercomputer. I can like take in everything and I can spit out like a result like in pretty low turnaround time. Um, which again contributes to my nerdiness and being smart. But that burns me the fuck out fast. So I've had to learn over the years to take it easy and not go so hard at things. Yeah. So yeah, and then there's the whole aspects of trauma falling under neurodivergence. Trauma does change your neurobiology. I don't think I want to talk about my trauma today, but because there's going to be plenty of episodes for that. But in my episode about Eden Lake, I mentioned the adverse childhood experiences study, where we now know that there's 10 adverse childhood experiences that contribute to childhood trauma, which have lasting effects into adulthood. Yeah, I've got all 10. So I will definitely be talking more about that. I had a very traumatic childhood. And also, the other point that I talked about that I super related to that falls under neurodivergent is that expansive thinking through meditation, that opening up your brain. So, everybody, there you have it. There's my evidence to you all and to myself that I am neurodivergent. This is the first time I've probably stated this publicly, and I didn't even really know anything about till a couple of years ago, and I just can't deny it. I've been called weird my entire life, and I cannot look at these characteristics and deny it. And it's okay. I'm okay with it. I embrace it. And honestly, I look at the diagnoses, and I don't really particularly relate to any of the diagnoses, but I can confidently say that I am neurodivergent. So now I just want to talk very, very broadly about my experience as a therapist out there in the counseling world. So early on into my career, I talked a lot about, coming into my internship and practicum in my last episode, my little bonus episode. And I didn't know what kind of therapist I wanted to be. So when I started taking clients, I started getting a lot of neurodivergent clients. And I kept hearing over and over again from clients that would come to see me that they being made to feel weird or misunderstood out there in the world. And this was such a consistent theme that a key portion of my marketing that I do for myself now says that I am a neurodivergent affirming therapist. And after I started putting that advertisement out there in the world, I basically started getting tons of referrals. And I got to say, that has been some of the most fulfilling work that I have done to date. And that moment when I start explaining all of these things to them, like I've explained to you, it's society that's making you feel that way. And like, what if all of these constructs didn't exist? Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's everybody else. just to be able to facilitate these affirming experiences and help people come to self-love has been some of the most amazing work that I've been able to do. And my goal as a neurodivergent therapist is to help people understand everything that I laid out at the beginning of this podcast, is that there's nothing wrong with them. They're not broken. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's society that is disabling. And that is work that I absolutely hope to continue, is to be a safe space and be affirming for those folks who have felt othered and made to feel weird their entire life. Folks, one more thing before I transition into talking about neurodivergence through the lens of the movie Longlegs. There's a few things that I've started to go back and edit this podcast that I feel like I have left out that I just feel is super important. And first of all, I just want to say that having gone to a school that is foundational in social justice has helped me to understand mental health and diversity through the lens of social justice, and how that is relevant to neurodivergence is that women are grossly underdiagnosed with autism compared to men. And the reason for that is that women are essentially, in our Western society, conditioned to carry the emotional labor. Let me ask you, women, have you ever been told to smile? Have you ever been told to just smile or sit still and look pretty? Men, have you ever been told that? Probably not. And that's exactly what I mean. And so women were expected to sort of put off this like kindness and empathy, and men are supposed to be tough. And so it's pretty normal for men to have more of a tough exterior. Whereas women, we have these expectations to put on us to mask. And I'm not saying every woman that's running around, happy or expressive or smiling is masking, but it can often get confused because that's what our society tells us we have to do all the time, even when we don't feel like it. And also to be highly responsible for not only our emotions, but the emotions of other people. Think about who you go to for comfort and care. Probably it's more often than not your mother or your wife or a girlfriend. And that is not saying I'm not over here being a man hater. It is just what statistics tell us about who seeks mental health care, who becomes mental health care providers. And we are taught to mask and just chug on forward no matter what we're feeling. Conceal, don't feel. There you go. There's your lesson from Elsa from Frozen. That just came to my mind. And so, since I've graduated from Antioch, I've since attended a continuing education class on, well, several things concerning autism and neurodivergence, but one of them in particular was about the underdiagnostic rate of women with autism in particular. There's just something else I feel like I just need to say. And that is, I just want to make this very clear that when I refer to the times in my life when I was in middle school and high school, in particularly, I don't have a damn bad thing to say about the people that I used to hang out with. And I'm not trying to say that, I was forcing myself to hang out with these people or anything like that. So I hope that people don't listen to this and think that. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. I just felt like, for example, let me just use the example of being a cheerleader. I felt like because I portrayed this bubbly personality all the time that I was expected to be a cheerleader because that's what cheerleaders are. And I decided my senior year of high school to stop being a cheerleader because I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I am tired of being a bubbly person all the damn time. I am exhausted of it. And not only that, I have this thing that other neurodivergent people report of having a difficulty being perceived. And obviously being in front of people all the time is pretty exhausting. And the other thing I feel like I just have to mention is what feels heavy on my heart is I feel like I've already said quite a bit in this podcast. I don't feel qualified to talk about children. I don't feel qualified to talk about people that have high support needs, or ADHD even, to some extent. I have my own unique lived experience of being a neurodivergent person. And then I have my sort of academic experience where I've done the research and I've done the reading and the studying. And then I have the part where I have sat with people for coming on 2 years now who have told me about their experience. Some of these people have high support needs. And it was already weighing on me that I feel like there's a part of me that feels like I shouldn't even be commenting on any of these things because I don't have any fucking idea what I'm talking about. I feel a little bit imposterish. And here's a little bit of a Eddington spoiler, people. So if you haven't seen Eddington yet, just go ahead and skip for the next couple minutes. I'm not going to tell you anything that's going to be wild or super spoiler. I was reading a bunch of reviews, which I thought the movie was fucking brilliant. It's one of my favorite movies of the year. I can't wait to talk more about it. I'm still sitting here like kind of aggravated in my nervous system after watching that movie, to be honest. And that's why I felt compelled on here to actually insert a new clip into this podcast because of what I just saw in that movie. But the movie kind of makes fun of itself a little bit, not a little bit, a lot. The entire movie I think is making fun of our society. And there's this part in the movie, and here's a little bit of spoiler, even though this is not going to make sense to y'all if you haven't seen the movie, where you've got these white people who are kind of keep regurgitating the same line that I'm a white person and I have no right to talk about Black rights. And so I'm just going to keep talking, but then I'm going to sit down. And then I got home and I started reading reviews of Eddington. And then some of the complaints about the movie is that, okay, Ari Aster, who is a white guy who is making a social commentary movie, making fun of people who are making fun of themselves about social justice. So what I took away from it is, and this is something that I've always known in the sphere of social justice, is honestly the best way to learn about diversity is from people with lived experience. And so, on one hand, I don't have a right to speak on these things that are not unique to my experience. And just the fact that I'm even saying this is exactly what's going on in Eddington. And even this meta thing that's happening outside of Eddington, where people are commenting on the movie saying, Ari Aster doesn't even have a right to comment on this comment. And so part of me is like, delete this entire podcast. You had no right to make it. And, someone who is autistic or has autistic children should be the one talking about this. And then there's this other part of me that's saying, okay, well, I do hold this neurodivergent identity, and I didn't know about any of this until a couple years ago. No one was talking about this in my life until someone taught me about it. And being a neurodivergent affirming therapist, I know that I have had the capacity to make a difference in people's lives. And so I'm sitting here as I'm making this podcast, like wrestling with that tension of having no right to make these comments. And so that's why I've tried to take a lot of care and basically of being very, very clear about what my knowledge and expertise is about the spectrum of things, and how I see how people's lived experiences are vastly different, and everyone has a right to their own lived experiences. No one has a right to tell you how to live your life or how you care for yourself. Kind of along that same line, I also don't want to sit here and be like, wham, poor me, because I have had a lot of privilege in my life as a white person, someone who has, I didn't have a lot of economic privilege growing up, though I did have help, from grandparents and other people. And so I definitely had more economic privilege than others. I am certainly have been good my whole entire life of presenting as neurotypical until, it kind of leaks out that I'm clearly not. But with that being said, there's a part of me that needs to name that I didn't get oppressed like a lot in the same way that other neurodivergent folks would have been in middle school and high school. I had the skills to mask to keep myself safe, essentially. And I've wondered this ever since I've started kind of reflecting on my life and my history, which, thinking about like identity and such, I would say that journey kind of started back in 2018. I have often wondered, how did people see me? Because I know like I was having this internal battle of identity, but like how did other people see me? I see movies sometimes like Mean Girls, and I'm like, oh my God, is that how people saw me? Because like very easily could have. And then I see movies like The Craft, and I'm like, is that how people saw me? And then I see movies like, I don't know, Idle Hands. I'm just throwing that out there as like, kind of a stoner and a drinker or something. I'm like, is that how people saw me? And then, when Caddy Heron from Mean Girls joins the Mathletes, I'm like, is that how people saw me? I don't really have any idea, y'all. The only clues that I have is I was told I was an asshole at one point in middle school by a friend of mine. And she straightened me up real quick, and I was very thankful for that. And I know that I certainly tried to be nice to everybody, but I don't know. And so I would, if you went to high school with me, and you had and I need a fucking reality check right now, please welcome it with open arms. There's some clues from high school that make me think that I treated people with respect, and that I made people feel cared about. But I don't know. Again, I'm open to the fucking reality check. So bring it on. Now that I've come in and added this little portion, we will now transition into the Longlegs portion. All right, Exorcist horror fans, we're going to transition now into talking about neurodivergence through the lens of the movie Longlegs. Longlegs was a 2024 horror crime movie that was directed by Oz Perkins, and it stars Micah Monroe, Blair Underwood, Alicia Witt, and absolutely creepy as fuck Nicolas Cage as Longlegs. And it's a crime drama where you've got Micah Monroe, who is Lee Harker in the movie. She's an FBI agent. She's helping to unravel a case that's very much this killer's leaving behind codes and secrets, and she's kind of helping the FBI decode along the way. And essentially, she discovers, huge spoiler alert, so go ahead and skip or move ahead, or if you don't want it to be spoiled. But she eventually discovers that her mother is the accomplice of Longlegs, and that essentially her mother and Longlegs are co-conspirators in this demonic plot to, this is the part I'm not really sure about, a demonic, maybe nihilistic plot to murder families. There are some references to Revelations and scripture that seem to imply there's some numerology involved about how many lives they are supposed to take. I gotta say, my experience of the movie seems to be very consistent with other people's experience of the movie. From what I could tell, this was a quite divisive movie. It was very much hyped up. The marketing was super clever for this movie. They claimed it was going to be the scariest movie of the year. There was posters everywhere for it. Very hyped up. And very generally speaking, again, just I know everyone had a different experience of it, but the sort of consensus from what I can tell from the community is that the movie didn't quite meet initial expectations because of the overhype. But upon second or third watch of this movie, it gets better, because after you kind of overcome the overhype and you've seen the movie once, you kind of understand what's going on, and then you can watch the movie through the lens of understanding what's going on. It's actually much, much better, and you can kind of settle into the creepiness of it and kind of go with the flow. The first time I saw this movie in theater, my attention was immediately on the lead character, Lee Harker, who was played by Micah Monroe, who was just an absolutely stunning scream queen. She is in one of my all-time favorite horror movies of all time ever, called It Follows. And she is just an absolutely stunning actress. Like, her acting ability is phenomenal. And immediately I couldn't help to notice in this movie that her affect was pretty flat. And flat affect is the word for just kind of not very responsive socially, or not very expressive. And I heard some reviews of this movie after I saw the movie that basically accused Micah Monroe of being a bad actress. And I was like, that's not true, because she is not a bad actress. And at the same time, while I was watching this movie, I could not help but to pick up other sort of clues in this movie, which obviously, if you've got to this point in the podcast, you clearly probably know where I'm going with this. And so Micah Monroe has these qualities in this movie as Harker. She's got this flat affect. She's socially awkward. She's highly intuitive. She has this very high intellectual functioning when it comes to putting patterns together. She is very literal. She takes a lot of things that are said in the movie very literal. And she's also experienced trauma. And so when you add all of those things up, I remember sitting in the movie theater thinking, Micah Monroe is not a bad actress. Micah Monroe is right now portraying in this film someone who is neurodivergent, maybe even autistic. And so immediately when I got out of the movie, I Googled it. And yeah, what I saw was people were like accusing her of being a bad actress. But I also did start immediately seeing articles come up where people were like praising the movie for portraying neurodivergent qualities on the big screen. A lot of what I saw on the internet was praise. We're like, wow, finally we're seeing ourselves on the big screen. And it's so relatable. And y'all, the internet's a big place. So again, you get all kinds of bullshit out there, and you get a lot of affirming stuff. So, and of course, my sample size of whatever I'm going to search is going to be my own little echo chamber. So I'm going to see what I want to see, because I'm going out there doing Google searches in very specific ways, and my algorithm's going to show me what I want to see. I totally get that. And I'll be curious to hear what you think after listening to this episode. But regardless, there were objectively some people out there that saw themselves in Harker and felt affirmed by that, by having representation in a movie. And I also had that thought as I watched the movie. So then for this podcast, as I was thinking about being so passionate about neurodivergence and how I've recently come to understand myself through this lens, and then working with my clients that I'm so passionate about, I got to think, I was like, well, I wonder what Micah Monroe thinks about that. I wonder if there's been any interviews or any comment on this from the director. And so I was able to find this interview in Digital Spy where Micah Monroe says that, let's see, I'll just read you the piece of it. It's easy to assume Micah Monroe, who plays FBI agent Lee Harker in Longlegs, would take inspiration from Jodie Foster's performance as Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs. But for Monroe, the inspiration came more from Lisbeth Salander in The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And this is a quote from Micah Monroe. I thought there's a lot of similarities to sort of how they go through life, being a bit of an outsider, uncomfortable in normal situations, and holding conversation, she explained. So, folks, I'm just giving y'all evidence why I think that Micah Monroe was indeed intentionally portraying someone who is neurodivergent. I have read the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, and I saw the movies. Lisbeth Salander, and I'm sorry, as far as the skills that I have in life, other languages are at the very bottom of the list, so forgive me for my pronunciation. But Lisbeth Salander has Asperger's syndrome in Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And there's no such thing anymore as Asperger's syndrome. So Asperger's syndrome is now considered just part of the autism spectrum. Asperger's syndrome was named after Hans Asperger, who was an Austrian pediatrician who essentially worked with the Nazis to basically help weed out, basically to help sort through children and decide who got to live and who got to die based on their intellect. And so that is why we don't use Asperger's syndrome anymore, is because it's basically tied to this horrible man. When I heard that, that blew my fucking mind. I can't believe we've been using that for as long as we have been. So there you have it, folks. There's my evidence based on the traits that Lee Harker portrays in Longlegs, along with an interview that she is therefore portraying someone who is on the autism spectrum. And with that being said, Micah Monroe is a fucking brilliant actress. So with that being said, I do want to talk about a few more very specific instances in this movie that I just think were absolutely brilliant that further point to this evidence. So again, going back to that, just kind of flat affect, unresponsive. I know I've probably said this 100,000 times, and I got to say this is part of my neurodivergent presentation, is sometimes I'm very repetitive and it's my way of making sure that I'm feeling heard. So I'm totally aware of it. But I will say that, again, autism presents on a spectrum. So there's not one size fits all for anybody. But sometimes autism presents with this unresponsiveness, this lack of eye contact. How many times in your life has someone told me, hey, look me in the face or look me in the eyeballs? It is considered polite. It is considered what you're supposed to do. And often children are punished for that. They're punished for not looking adults in the eyes or other people in the eyes. It's considered rude, and we're punished for it. But for some folks with autism, it's difficult. And I spoke about this earlier because of all the sensory input that they're getting. I mean, if you think about the eyes, right? They're the windows to the soul. It's very difficult for an autistic person, and I know different autistic people have different reasons for doing this, but generally speaking, it has a lot to do with that sensory overload. You know, looking someone in the eyes requires a lot of focus, attention, and for someone who's already sensory overloaded, that can be completely emotionally overwhelming for somebody because you're already processing the social interaction, other stimuli that's going on in the environment. And so it's a big emotional requirement to manage your own responses while being attuned to someone else's responses. And so for some folks, it's not doable. And so it's much safer, it's much more comfortable for them, or it is just simply their natural response to not react as much, not look folks in the eye. Rewatching this movie, I made some notes where Harker was not looking people in the eye, sometimes unresponsive when being spoken to. There was this moment where I think it was her boss was talking to her, and he straight up said, "Hey, look at me." And yep, this tracks. And coming to another of these characteristics, this high intellectual ability, pattern recognition. Again, folks on the spectrum, it's a spectrum. So on one end of the spectrum, you might have folks with high support needs, with some very legitimate learning difficulties, and they need extra supports. They need extra things in place to be able to help them learn. And we all learn differently. And like I just said just a minute ago, I have no ability to learn languages. I hung that up years ago. Whatever part of my brain that is does not respond. It just does not record that information. For me, I'm a highly verbal processor, which is why this podcast makes a whole lot of sense for me. It's a wonderful outlet. In this movie, we see how just amazing Lee Harker is at decoding the letters that are left behind by Longlegs, finding the patterns, being able to solve the case. And there's at one point where her boss even mentions that in the movie. He's like, this case blew wide open as soon as you showed up. Now, I will say it's not only because of her intellectual abilities, but it's also because of her personal involvement. She's involved in this case. She got pulled into this case for a reason. There was some sort of what's the opposite of divine? Evil intervention. And then I want to talk about the social awkwardness. One of my most favorite scenes of this movie is very beginning of the movie, where Harker is invited to come into the home of her boss, and he says, "Hey, come in and meet my wife and kid." And she said, "Do I have to?" He said, "Yes." And then she goes in, and it's just like, it's so painfully awkward. And oh my gosh, I was feeling every inch of this interaction. She was so awkward, and I was like, yeah, totally relatable. And what was even more awkward was she somehow ends up in the child's bedroom, and I guess is like talking to her about being in law enforcement and being a female in law enforcement, which was a cool moment. And she's got her back facing this child. All her body language is saying that she does not want to be there, which again is like not your neurotypical social norms of how you interact with people. I kind of explained that from my own experience earlier of just having all the stimulus. It's hard to like take in so much information. But I found this article that says it's titled "Rethinking Autism from Social Awkwardness to Social Creativity." And I love that reframe. So instead of calling folks socially awkward, calling them socially creative. That's on behavioralscientist.org. And basically what this article says is that often autistic folks, they don't respond in the neurotypical way when trying to connect to others, and not the way we expect them to, but in a creative way that works for them. And in this movie, Harker, she wants to connect with this person, but clearly taking in this person's, like, looking at her face, being perceived by this child is just too much. Being perceived is something I hear from people a lot in the neurodivergent community. Being perceived is hard for people that are neurodivergent. Is like having eyes on you is often too much stimuli, and then looking at someone else and taking in all of their, body language, that's also too much. And so as Harker has her back turned to this child, she picks up one of the child's trophies and uses that sort of as a conversation tool. And so that was Harker's creative way of making a connection with this child in a way that was comfortable for her. And so I'm going to do what this article says and reframe social awkwardness to social creativity. And then there's this aspect of literal thinking. Harker has these moments of literal thinking, and I just kind of giggled when it happened, because I certainly run into this with now that I'm aware of it with neurodivergent folks. They're discussing going to see, I think the character's name is Carrie Ann, in the mental institution, And her boss says, yeah, that's not far from here. And Harker responds with, yes, it's exactly 162 miles. Like, not far is like too much of an abstract concept for Harker in that moment. Like, she already knows exactly how many miles it is. And there's another moment where a law enforcement agent is quoting Revelations to Harker, but the officer says, yeah, that's from the book of Revelation. And Harker just immediately corrects her and says, Revelations. I don't know a whole lot on this. I did look this up for just a moment, and there are some scientific articles about why folks with autism have this tendency to think literally. It has to do with those parts of the brain that have the ability to think in abstracts versus don't. And so folks with autism tend to have have difficulty with abstract language or idioms or sarcasm, and so that's where that literal thinking comes up. It's just like that difference in the way their brain processes and where that different parts of their brain processes from. And then I want to talk for a moment about trauma, because this is actually something that I was researching independently of from this podcast a few weeks ago. The research was about autism and memory and how that overlaps with trauma. And long story short, is this study found that folks with autistic traits are more vulnerable to the effects of trauma, even mild symptoms of trauma. And that's because there's a common overlap in individuals who have experienced trauma and then folks with autism. And it's this medial frontal cortex part of the brain that's in charge of our fear circuitry. And so folks with autism are extremely already very sensitive to stimuli and their environment. And so any slight trigger is going to decode that moment, that event in their life as trauma. And it's going to create this fearful memory, which might lead to amnesia. It basically has the same effect that trauma would have, like a larger traumas might have on somebody. And so they found it's the exact same mechanism. And essentially, this can lead to altered memory. It can lead to difficulties with emotional regulation. And folks with autism sometimes have difficulty with emotional regulation anyway because of just the constant barrage of stimulus that's incoming, period. And y'all, I'm using autism right now just because that's what the study says, but autism is under the umbrella of neurodivergence. So a lot of this is interchangeable. And so basically, a little trauma for an autistic person is basically has the same effect as a big trauma on a neurotypical person. And so I want to just say that. Think twice about that the next time you tell somebody that they're overreacting about something, because neuroscience tells us differently, that they can't help it. And you don't know people's experience, you don't know their life, you don't know their brain. No, it's up to nobody to tell someone whether or not they're overreacting. So the good news about that is you treat folks with autism characteristics the same way as you would someone with a trauma-informed care in mental health counseling. Help them reprocess those traumatic memories in a safe way and help them create safety for themselves, help them be affirming of their identities. And again, this is exactly a type of work that I absolutely love to do. And so relating this back to Longlegs, I just explained how trauma and neurodivergence overlap. I mentioned at the front of this podcast that trauma changes the neurobiology of the brain. So even if Harker would have just experienced trauma, she would have belonged in the neurodivergent category anyway. And so I posit that Harker's got some trauma in her life, evidence of these repressed memories of what happened in her childhood, and seeing the condition of her mother's house and the way her mother's living. There's some drugs that were found in the house, and there's some lack of connection with her mother because there was some hesitation of Harker wanting to reconnect with her mother in the movie. And so there's some attachment wounds there. So I posit that Harker's got some trauma there. With all that being said, I know what you might be thinking right now. You might be thinking, okay, well, I've seen this movie. I know how it ends. I know that actually Harker was being sort of controlled by an evil magical doll that was possessed by devil magic, and that was creating this personality in her, and that would not be a bad argument. But I have a couple of counterpoints to that. So if we look at Harker as a kid, whenever we first see her when Longlegs shows up, she was not making contact with Longlegs, and she was just taking Polaroid pictures of him out in the snow. And look, okay, I realize that I am sitting in my own echo chamber right now, generating my own evidence, and just doing a big old confirmation bias right now. I am looking for evidence to confirm my own opinion right here, and I am super aware of that. So, uh, just roll with me, and I'm totally here for any alternate opinions. So, Harker's not making eye contact with Longlegs when he shows up. She's taking Polaroids of him out in the middle of the snow. I don't have kids, so I can't speak to whether or not this is normal behavior. It seems a little, it seems a wee bit odd to me. So I don't know. Y'all tell me. And so this is obviously before she was infected by the evil magic devil doll. And then after the evil magic devil doll, she is just stunned. It's hard to say. I mean, honestly, to me, to be completely honest, it does look like she might have a little bit of a fuller range of expression, but she's also in a full on fucking panic because now she's realized what's happened and what's going on, and she's running over to her boss's house to save the little girl, save the family, but she realizes she's too late. But it's definitely undeniable that what she's experiencing is traumatic. And so that is a little bit of, I know this is a qualm that people have with the ending of the movie, is we don't know what's going to happen, and so we don't get to see what Harker's life looks like or understand what the end result is going to be after that final shot. And is Harker going to writhe in hell like her mom said because that mission wasn't able to be completed? Harker wasn't able to kill the evil devil doll, and so is that little girl now possessed? Does Harker go back to kill the evil devil doll? Like, the movie does have a little bit of an ambiguous ending. So I guess what I'm saying is, sure, yeah, it could have been the evil magic devil doll the whole time creating this experience and informing Harker's life. And also, does it really matter if it's created this affirming experience for folks? This is what Harker designed her character after in the first place. So there you have it, folks. Longlegs and neurodivergence, and a little bit about my story to go along with it. Some of the demons that I feel like potentially were exercised through this episode for me, through talking about my experience with coming to understand myself through neurodivergence, with coming to learn about others through their neurodivergent experience, seeing someone like Micah Monroe playing what seems to be a neurodivergent character on the big screen, is this theme of living your life in a way that works for you. Of course, we live in a relational world where we do live in the context of other people, and we can't ignore that. However, I want to come back to this idea of what is normal, who gets to decide that, and what if we all put aside this idea of normalcy? What if we all put aside this idea of trying to live our lives to make other people comfortable, to make other people happy? What if we all took off our masks and used a few less of our emotional, physical, mental, spiritual resources, just be our true, authentic selves? I wonder what life would be like. I think that would require a world where there wasn't these social constructs around what is normal, about what is weird, about what is awkward. And so it makes sense that we walk around with our masks on and that we adopt identities that feel safe, depending on the context that we're in at the time. Masking is not a bad thing. That's one thing that I've learned about working with neurodivergent individuals. It's something that I've learned about myself. That's what's made me get through life as far as I have and been as successful as I have. I'm incredibly good at blending in and appearing normal when I need to be. Until I'm not, then I get called out on it and feel super ashamed. I am working on allowing myself to let my freak flag fly and be a little more weird and not give a shit what other people think about it. But it's taken me 38 years and I'm still not good at it. But sometimes the mask serves a purpose. It helps us fit in. It helps us blend in this social relational world that we live in. And that's okay. Notice what resources it requires to wear those masks, to feel like you have to blend in, to make others feel comfortable. For me, it's been a little bit about leaning into the fact that I am a little bit of a rigid thinker. I mentioned in one of my podcasts that there's that part of my brain that worked really well as an engineer and that shows up sometimes in my career as a mental health professional. And sometimes I'm really ashamed of it. I wish I could be more flexible, but I'm not. I get really rigid in my thought processes sometimes, and it's hard to get out of that. I need things to be more clear. I need things to be black and white. And when it's not, I get pretty dysregulated. And I'm working on that, but it is part of who I am. And there's a part of me that cannot tolerate to make people uncomfortable. I make other people feel good, which makes me a valuable person in this society. And so, what happens if I stop making other people feel good? What does that mean about me? That means I don't have an identity anymore. That means I have no purpose anymore. Whew. You see what happens there? It can lead to some pretty dark places. And so, what I'm learning is that it's okay to make other people feel uncomfortable, and it's okay to speak up for myself. It's okay to set boundaries. Even in this podcast, as I y'all saw even how hard it went. I'm not going to edit that out. I'm going to leave it in here. It was hard for me to admit that there's been a part of me that's been masking my entire life, and that I've had people in my life that I love and cherish dearly that have hurt me. But that's my truth. And it's not my job to pretend like I'm not hurt anymore. A lot of people have always seen me as a very sweet and nice person. I am, but not all the time. I like to cuss. I get mad. I have a part inside me that it's raging and stomping around and is having a total complete meltdown a couple days a week. And I've learned how to channel that. So for me, Exorcist, I can't claim that this demon is completely exorcised, but I will say that what feels exorcised is partially the demon of conformity. And I'm not sure it'll ever be fully exercised. I'm not sure I ever want it to be fully exercised. I need it sometimes. But for now, that's good enough. Okay, bye.